Hi everyone, good afternoon. Thanks for joining in. We're just waiting a couple of minutes more for more people to join in and then we'll start. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this day 2 of the Roundtable on Residential Electricity Consumption. This is our 4th annual Roundtable jointly organized by the Center for Policy Research, Prayas Energy Group, and the Oxford India Center for Sustainable Development at the University of Oxford. The day 1 of the Roundtable took place last week on September 29, and the session focused on looking at electricity demand transitions in rural homes. The session featured Dr. Sonali Pachori from EASA, Dr. Namrata Chindarkar from IIM Ahmedabad, and Mr. Samit Mitra from Smart Power India. Today's session will look at the opportunities and challenges of demand response in Indian homes. As we know, residential electricity demand in India is expected to grow exponentially in coming years, largely driven by increased demand for air conditioning. As per the IEA, the demand for space cooling could contribute over 40% of the peak electricity demand in India by 2050. Demand response programs can help reduce this peak demand and offer possibilities of meeting the growing energy needs for development in a low carbon manner. Additionally, with the increased penetration of rooftop solar and electric vehicles, demand response will become a necessity. Recognizing this, the ECBC Residential now has added an annexure on smart homes. We are joined today by 3 experts who will talk about the opportunities and challenges of implementing demand response programs in Indian homes. We have Dr. Phil Grunewald, Dr. Vishal Garg, and Dr. Andrew Peacock who have joined us here. Thank you. So before we begin our presentations, just a quick note on the flow for today. So we'll have about 40 minutes of presentations, followed by the Q&A and discussion. We encourage our audience members to post questions while the presentations are going on in the Q&A box. Our speakers will be answering them in the Q&A box itself and also talking about them during the discussion. So we'll start with Dr. Phil Grunewald, our first presentation for today. He'll be talking about the roles for new smart technologies and consumers in systems with high renewables. Phil, over to you.
Thank you very much. Yes, I've got the great pleasure today to talk about possibly my favorite topic, finding flexibility in energy systems. And I should probably declare that my work is very much focused on the UK. So my insights into India are actually quite limited. And to make matters worse, we've just published a paper to say that translating findings on flexibility from one country to another is actually quite flawed. So we've compared 2 supposedly quite similar countries, Germany and the UK, and found that the times when you need flexibility are very different because the supply systems are different, but also the availability of flexibility and the means by which it can be provided are very different, because even Germany and the UK have culturally quite different patterns of energy use. So what I'll present to you today, I hope will be of interest, but I'm delighted that we'll have a roundtable at the end to basically discuss how it could be made useful for the Indian context, because I should stress this is very much UK-based data. And even though I haven't got much academic insight into India, I have, for my sins 20 years ago, cycled through India, so I've got a little bit of insight. This is me 20 years ago. So we made our journey from Goa all the way to Nepal. So I've experienced a lot of quite rural life in India, and also some very sustainable modes of transport, means to keep cool. So that was very helpful to get some insights. The other thing I've learned, for the first time in my life, I experienced firsthand demand curtailment. So every now and then we treat ourselves to stay in a hotel, and on check-in you'd be told that, you know, today between 4 and 6 in the afternoon there won't be any electricity. And coming from a UK background, I thought, how do you know? And I thought, well, that's always the case. So it was a very managed and planned process, and to me that was new and in a sense a revelation, how energy systems differ. Now, to give you the UK context, the UK aims to reach zero carbon by 2050, and all our measurements are relative to 1990. So in terms of time, we are now halfway between 1990 and 50-50. And in terms of emissions, we're also about halfway. So that's very good news. But if you ask people in the UK, you know, what have we done to achieve this? Most people in their everyday life have actually made no specific effort to reduce energy use. So all this gain that we've had so far is a technology success. And the second half is expected to be quite different. So technology can take us so far, but it won't take us all the way. And the Committee on Climate Change, which monitors the progress of our decarbonisation, estimates that from now to 2050, some 59% are either entirely societal or a combination of technical and societal changes that are needed. So arguably, this is going to be a much more difficult and challenging part to reach the second half of this journey. Now, when we ask ourselves, what do we actually mean by societal and behavioral change, and how do we change society and behavior, you immediately realize these are really big and hard to fathom questions. And what most academics do when they're faced with a question they don't know the answer to is they substitute the question. And I'll do the same here. So rather than talking about societal and behavioral changes, I just want to talk about human choices. Which is a much easier concept, and just to introduce, you know, a few choices to you. So people have political choices through voting. They make choices through purchasing decisions, which technologies they adopt, when and how. We've got lifestyle choices, something that so far we've shied away from actually addressing. And I want to talk a little bit about how untouchable they are. And we've got prioritization choices, and this is very much where flexibility comes in. You know, what do we do when, and can we move things about? And in order to address the second big question of, you know, how do we change choices, I want to go back to my engineering roots. So by background, I'm a systems engineer, and for those of you who are not systems engineers and might be interested in this space, there's a fantastic book by Donella Meadows called Thinking in Systems, and it essentially advocates that every aspect of life can be viewed as a system. And what I mean by a system is something that consists of states and flows. So if we think of a sink, it might have a certain level of water that we want in this sink. And in order to achieve a higher or lower level, we have two means to do that. We can toggle the input with the tap, or we can increase or reduce the outflow. And that way we get the state that we want. And the process that allows the state change is feedback. So we observe the state and then we give feedback to change the state. And that applies for systems in pretty much every walk of life. And as I said, since I see everything as a system, energy very much so is a system where we need feedback. And the important thing about feedback is that it needs to be timely, targeted, and transactable. And I'll come back to that, and maybe these are points for discussion as well. So energy choices. This is crudely how the system works at the moment. People use energy, and not going into too much detail about why these are clouds, but essentially these are things we don't worry about. We get energy and it does something. And people currently in the UK specifically get two types of feedback. One is your energy bill, which will land on your desk every 6 months or so, and gives you a very hefty amount of money that you have to pay, but with very little explanation which of your energy use has actually resulted in this number. It's quite opaque, and after months of use, very hard to sort of feed back to what actually caused that. The second feedback that is more recent since the rollout of smart meters in the UK is an in-home display. That's sort of at the other extreme of frequencies. Tells you something every 10 seconds about your acute energy use. And arguably, both these things are either a little bit too slow or a little bit too fast. And the unit of inquiry here, so rupees, dollars, pounds, and kilowatt or kilowatt hours, are not very salient to most people. Well, money might be salient, but very often the connection with the energy is not. So here's a slightly more complicated, but maybe more meaningful depiction of the feedbacks that are happening. So the two complications that are happened here on the right, we certainly have a slightly better representation of the things that energy actually does for us. It leads to well-being. It has impacts on our status in society. There's important cost-benefit implications of an economic nature, and obviously a lot of us are increasingly concerned about the environmental impact of energy, and all these things feed back to people to shape their choices. And the choices here are broken down into two distinct categories. There is behavior. These are sort of more or less spontaneous things that we do on a day-to-day basis. And then there are some very critical ones, which I would call here investment decisions. So this is us purchasing a new appliance or changing an appliance. And these are less frequent, but quite critical in shaping everything that happens down the line. So here's a slightly more complicated and accurate, hopefully, depiction of the feedback processes that are happening in energy. And in order to make them work well, I would advocate we need to move away from just presenting people with data. So on the bottom left, this is a very common display that people have if they have PV on their roof. And essentially, it's just, to most people, it's a random display of numbers. It has no context, it has no meaning. And in the same way, most in-home displays at the moment are presenting numbers at people with very little transactable information. So step one is to turn data into information that is more salient to people. And I would go one further, that information we're also somewhat overloaded with in many walks of life. So if we can turn that information into a transactable message, so that's something that tells people what to do, then you might actually be able to shape things much better. And here are a few examples of the sort of messages that people might appreciate and be able to action. So this is the conceptual framework of what we're trying to do. In practice, to find out more about these processes, and I know the conversation last week turned to time use studies. So this is what we are doing at the moment. So we're collecting data from appliances, from people, and because it's very difficult, the appliances don't really tell you why they're operating. If you ask people directly why they're using appliances, that's also very difficult to conceptualize very often. So what we do in addition is we'll just collect time use diaries. So we've got an app where people can very simply record what they're doing, and we get a picture of what they do and when. So this is a typical UK profile of activities with a flurry of activities early in the morning and another flurry of activities in the evenings, broken down by different categories. And the nice thing that we can do as part of this study is, because time use studies have been done quite a bit, but it's hard to link those patterns to energy use. So while people record activities, we also take samples of their electricity use, and then we can map one onto the other. People get some feedback, so they can actually see how their activity patterns mapped onto their electricity use, which can be interesting for some. And for us, the interesting thing is to do regression to understand which activities lead to high or low usage at different times of day. So here's a whole raft of, interestingly, these are not appliances, these are reported activities. So people would tell us they've used a washing machine and so on and so forth. And we've tested, and their reporting is actually quite accurate. And what these marginal contributions tell us is when somebody reports a particular activity, how much does it up or down their normal energy use. And you'll see on the left here, the things that lead to more energy use are very much hot meal related things, so oven, eating a hot meal, meal preparation, those sort of things. And some of the things on the right here are related to cold meals. So meals clearly feature very strongly in the UK, and the type of meal matters. And one activity I want to single out here as a activity of particular interest for the UK population, you know, Brits love drinking tea. And even though making a hot drink uses energy, the activity of having a hot drink actually reduces energy use. So you could think of it as displacing other activities that would be more energy intensive. And the net benefit is actually a reduction in demand, which we thought was very interesting. We've gone a little bit further, and in order to understand flexibility, I thought it's worth intervening. So we'll give in feedback and messages to ask people to reduce energy use at particular times, and then observe both the electricity use, which you can see on the left here. So in the period 5 to 7, which we asked them to reduce demand, you can see a very significant reduction of around 14% in load. I should stress the 5 to 7, that is where it matters in the UK. So early evening peak demand in the UK is where the system struggles and where the emissions would be the highest. And what was interesting here is that we can now observe how did people go about achieving this change. So for example, if we pick out the washing machine, you can see in green that normally the pattern is to use the washing machine before 5 o'clock and somewhat between 5 and 7. And that in orange, you can see change to reduced use before the period, because people are aware that the machine would then run into this 5 to 7 period, but predominantly a delay to afterwards. So this is a very effective demand response mechanism that worked. The other thing that we got told before the study is that you don't even need to bother touching any sort of lifestyle issues. You know, nobody would want to change a hot meal. What we found in practice, actually, people did accommodate in this way. So hot meals were also reduced quite significantly. And it was then interesting to see through the data, how do people compensate? And in the UK, we found that instead of hot meals, people would report more snacks, so cold meals. And we've seen in the earlier data that's very effective to reduce demand. And the other one that we've seen in the other graph, you know, Brits love cups of tea, and especially in times of stress when they're asked to use less electricity, the tea consumption went almost through the roof. So that's clearly a coping mechanism when people can't have a hot evening meal. That was interesting, and obviously, as we've seen earlier, quite effective at reducing peak demand. So this was a very deliberate intervention that we imposed upon people. The other thing that obviously happened in the last year and a half was the COVID-induced lockdown. And during this period, we could observe how people responded to that. So there were changes in reporting of activities, very much as you'd expect. Traveling and socializing was very much restricted and under lockdown. The cup of tea, our coping mechanism, again goes up, and gardening was an activity that was more performed. But one that I want to single out here that is interesting is laundry. So the normal pattern for laundry is to be done in the early evening when people come home. And because people were at home anyway, they were able to do laundry earlier in the day, which also led to a reduced use of tumble dryers. Because in the evening, if you're in a rush, you put on a washing machine followed by a tumble dryer. If they do it during the day, there's a better chance that they use line drying, i.e. a lower energy consumption pattern, which was only possible because they were at home and could do this. So home working was one of those newly discovered interesting areas for load shifting. And we've compared within our data the energy use patterns of people who work from home and those who don't work from home. So this is irrespective of the lockdown. This is just previous to the lockdown. You can see in blue that people who work from home obviously have a higher electricity use pattern during the day. But interestingly, these peak hours that we try to principally avoid with flexibility in the UK, the non-home workers have to do more of their chores in the early evening, and therefore, as you would expect, have higher energy use. So there's a lot of variables and categories by which we can sort of try to understand what shapes demand and how might we want to impact and influence that. if you want to explore it a little bit more, we've put a profiling tool on our website, energyuse.org/profile. And there you can scan through all sorts of things, number of children, income, which appliances they own or don't own. So, looking forward, we're very interested to see, what impact does an electric vehicle have, or heat pump heating, and obviously, the adoption of air conditioning units would be interesting to see how that changes patterns. I'm going to stop here. I hope, even though this is very much UK focused, it'll be fascinating for me to see how this could translate and give us insights into domestic use in India. And I want to close with my favorite photo from that cycle trip 20 years ago, which was this road sign in the middle of Delhi. In mad traffic, you suddenly get greeted by a very nice bit of feedback, which was just asking you to relax. And I thought that was wonderful. I want to share that with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Phil. That was excellent. Just a gentle reminder to our audience members to post their questions in the Q&A box. We see we are doing it already. We will now hear from Dr. Vishal Garg. Dr. Garg is a professor at IIIT Hyderabad, where he also heads the Center for Information Technology in Building Science. Dr. Garg will talk about the development of smart home energy management systems for integration in the ECBCR, a roadmap for implementation for demand response in India, and talk about his current research initiatives.
Thank you, Anna. Am I audible?
Yes.
Thank you. So hello, everyone. I'm going to talk about smart home energy management system, how it is being integrated into ECBCR, and what's the kind of roadmap that has been developed for implementation in the country, and the current research, especially what we are doing at IIIT in an Indo-UK project reside. So before we get into the core area of discussion today, I would like to say that there are several definitions of smart homes and more specifically smart energy home. So what essentially they mean is that a smart home is the one which has devices which are interconnected, and we can do remote monitoring and management of these devices. When it comes to smart energy homes, we are specifically looking for energy aspect of these devices. So we are controlling them and monitoring them such that we can save energy or have a demand response. So smart energy home is a subset of smart homes focusing on energy. So we are seeing a lot of interest these days in smart homes, and more specifically on smart energy homes. And we did some survey and to understand that what are the drivers. So we identified several drivers, and 6 of the important drivers are, first of all, it's easy to get do-it-yourself kits. So we can easily buy a bulb and put it on Wi-Fi and use an app and control it, right? So it's becoming easy. You don't need an expert to come and install such things. There is a rising disposable income that people have, and they are willing to spend on these things. And also these things are becoming more affordable. Then one interesting thing that we are finding is that availability of internet is widespread, it is stable, and therefore IoT is penetrating into the homes, and that brings the possibility of artificial intelligence running on the cloud, and we are able to actually leverage the benefits of AI into control and automation at homes. So overall, these are the drivers. In our survey, we also tried to understand what are the barriers, and interestingly, price is the biggest barrier, though I just mentioned that the cost reduction is a driver, but from people's perspective, they still think that it is expensive. Probably they are not very well aware of the latest developments, or even those are expensive in their opinion. But if you leave aside the price for the time being, the 4 major barriers are security, data privacy, people are very, very conscious about sharing all this data to the service provider, or they are worried that these devices can be breached, and their Wi-Fi network can be breached, and a lot of privacy breach and data breach can happen. And then you can get these devices, but there is very little service infrastructure at the back end to support this and to facilitate the use of such devices. And the biggest problem, which I think, though it was not a barrier that was the biggest identified in the survey, is of interoperability. So I can't use one app with all the devices, or I can't use one sensor from one manufacturer to work with another device from another manufacturer. So interoperability is also a big concern. Then we did what is the technological trend and the market trend. We found that there are a lot of interesting things happening in the market and technology. One is the entry point devices. So people are willing to spend on entertainment. So it's very common to find people having smart TVs, smart speakers, and these devices are being made available in the homes very easily. And even set-top boxes or routers are very common. So what is happening, these devices are bought for entertainment, and then later on they can be extended, they can be used for energy management or for any other smart home application. So they are becoming the entry point into the homes. Then smart home, instead of people buying the products, it seems that smart home is moving towards service. So some utility provider, telecom provider, or cable network provider is expected to provide smart home as a service. So you take the bundle of products, it comes as a service, you pay rentals, and then you are assured that the firmware is updated, the hardware is updated, and new services are added. And you don't have to worry about what devices to buy, how to configure, and all those things. Then another thing that's happening is standard fitment. So a lot of builders and a lot of buyers are showing interest in homes which come with smart devices already fitted into the home. So that way it is a seamless integration. The price also comes down, and it's more professionally installed set of equipment. So this is also a trend which is picking up. One of the very, very important things is standardization, and standardization which leads to interoperability. So work is happening worldwide, and one of the most interesting and recent effort in this direction has been a smart home connectivity standard called Matter. And the most interesting thing I find in this case is that three big giants who are always competing with each other and very rarely they collaborate are Apple, Google, and Amazon. So they have come together and they have formed this alliance, and they are making this a standard, and a lot of industry support has been achieved by this standard. So this is a connectivity standard to increase interoperability between smart home devices across platform. Then artificial intelligence, as I already mentioned, artificial intelligence is becoming ubiquitous. Cloud computing and then IoT is enabling us to leverage this artificial intelligence into the control and providing intelligent feedback to the users so that their behavior can change and they can accept the kind of control mechanism that has been suggested to save energy and to reduce demand. Then one of the things that is picking up is use of chatbots to interact with homes. So generally people would use apps developed by different vendors, and it's a big pain to use different apps for different appliances in a home. So some of the apps try to collate all the devices and then give one interface, but still there is an app that we have to learn. So the new generation is very comfortable chatting, and they find it very comfortable to chat with the home. So instead of using an app, I would be more happy to use WhatsApp or Facebook Messenger or something, and then chat and then say, what is the status of light? What is the status of AC? Set the change the set point, or all these things, and messages can come, and I can send messages in natural language, and the chatbot will take care of that. Now, when we are talking about several sensors, several appliances, then the big problem that we face in such environments where there are so many wireless sensors is replacing the batteries. So you will see that a lot of energy harvesting technologies are emerging, and they can help us in charging these small sensors and devices that will be in homes spread all around, maybe wearable devices, and they can charge using various technologies. And if maybe they are without any battery, they just have a supercapacitor or a battery, but its life is extended to decades because it is continuously being charged. So these are the technology and market trends which we see in the area of smart home. Now let us see how smart energy homes is being included into the residential energy conservation building code of India. So currently it's an annexure, it's annexure E in the Smart Home Eco-Niman Samhita. And in this, the SHAMS, the Smart Home Energy Management System, has been given 5 main functionality. So monitoring, control, user interface, data sharing, and grid connectivity. So these are the 5 main functionalities, and then there are sub-functionalities in each of them. So like say, for example, monitoring the energy, load, comfort, outdoor conditions, controlling for energy savings, controlling for demand response, controlling for comfort, then user interface to show trends, to allow controls, to get tips, sharing of the data for preventive maintenance, for benchmarking, for measurement and verification, grid connectivity to get the demand response program, react to them, demand forecasting, and also if we have storage and generation, manage the storage and generation and connect with the grid. Now, what is being proposed in this annexure is the minimum functionality, what should be required for a home to be called smart energy home. So this functionality has some monitoring at the home level, at the appliance level, temperature, humidity, and occupancy sensor. Then there should be control at least on the air conditioner, on fan, and then at least one light which is controllable. There should be a user interface. It can be app, voice, or gesture based, and it should connect SHAMS over single software package and not a multiple set of packages. It should be able to communicate with the utility for demand response program, and it should share the data in an anonymous way so that it is possible to do benchmarking and to really see what's happening and how the whole program is working. Now, if you see the policy roadmap, in the policy roadmap, various actors have been identified like manufacturers, testing agencies, Bureau of Energy Efficiency, service provider, beneficiary like the people, homeowners, and the utility. And very good mechanism has been suggested that how a smart home certificate can be given, how do we ensure continuity of the performance of the smart home, how the utility can run the demand response programs, and beneficiary can participate and prove their participation, how the testing can be done, not only for the hardware, but also software, and overall how this whole system can function and deliver the required performance. Then there are some short-term recommendations, medium-term and long-term. In short-term, basically, first I address the biggest problems that people have identified: data security, interoperability, have testing facilities, create more awareness, and go for more voluntary program and more demonstration kind of things. Then in the medium term, it's more on reducing the cost and coming out with more demand response programs and giving some incentives for people to participate in that and move towards more of, research and bringing these things into the curriculum. When we see in the long term, the idea is to make this mandatory, have a certification program in place, and then even a labeling program which can tell how smart a home is. So this is a general roadmap. Now I will go to my last topic, which is what is the research that we are doing at IIIT Hyderabad. So in IIIT Hyderabad, we have a research project called Reside, which is funded by Department of Science and Technology in India. It's an Indo-UK research project. University of Oxford Brookes from UK is leading this project, and IIIT Hyderabad from India. And what we are doing, we are designing simple, smart home energy management system. We are going to deploy it in 200 homes and do a 12-month trial. Social technical analysis will be done in that trial to find out how people react to different feedback, whether it is energy feedback, normative feedback, energy saving tips, whether we give them some control and automation things to try out. And if we give a trial on time varying tariff, what is the flexibility? What do people do with that kind of tariff? So this is what we are going to deploy and generate load profiles for 200 homes. These are the components which will go into SHREMS, a smart energy meter, window open, door close sensor to find out if the door is open when the AC is on, or if the outdoors are comfortable, are people actually opening the windows and reducing the energy consumption by not running AC, temperature humidity sensor, smart sockets to control devices and to know how much energy they are consuming, and an IR emitter which can control basically any IR control device. In this case, we will be more interested in controlling air conditioner. So these devices will go into each home. Everybody will get an app and we'll run different trials. So that's it from me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vishal. Lots of very useful insights on what it will take to implement and scale demand response in India. With that, now we'll have Dr. Andrew Peacock. Dr. Peacock is an associate professor at Hewlett-Packard University, and today he will talk to us about their demand response program project in Tamil Nadu and what lessons they might be for wider scale adoption in India. Andrew?
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
I just get my slides up. And is the slide, are the slides showing okay?
Yes, they're visible. You could maybe make it full screen. Yes, perfect.
Okay, so thank you very much, Anna, and thank you for the invite to participate in the roundtable. I've enjoyed many of these as an audience member, so I hope we keep up the pace in terms of how stimulating they were. This one is compared to those that I've attended. So I'm talking on behalf of a team that has just completed a cooling demand response field trial among using a residential cooling demand response field trial in Auroville, an ecological community in Tamil Nadu. And it touches, actually, it was very interesting to hear the previous two presentations, because I think many of the kind of questions that we had in, or the learnings that we have derived from running this trial are to some extent have been picked up by the previous two presentations, and it's heartening to see that there's progress being made in some of these areas. So what I'm going to do is just jump very quickly to the results that we had. So what we've got here is a couple of line graphs showing the cooling demand profile of the participating dwellings, which is the blue line, with no intervention from our cooling demand response system. And the orange line shows the impact that we had. We ran our cooling demand response system from 6 p.m. at night till 6 a.m. in the morning to make sure that we were outside of time periods where outages may otherwise have occurred in the network because of large penetration of PV systems in the grid that we were operating in. I suppose there's just a couple of observations here that the blue line never actually happened. So the blue line was a prediction of what would have happened had we not been there. And obviously the orange line is measured. And so if we just jump to some of the nuances associated with prediction and measurement in that regard. So in terms of trying to predict what would happen if a demand response event had never occurred, well, in terms of cooling, we have climate is obviously a substantial forcer of cooling demand. And we can see here a daily consumption pattern for a whole calendar year for a feeder in Delhi. And we can see characteristic responses to climate discretized by a monsoon period and a dry season. And we can generate at a daily level pretty good predictions of consumption using day-ahead forecasting of weather. We also, in demand response, need to understand a bit of a time clock position. So we need higher temporal resolution forecasting. And there are, so there are ways of carrying this out as well. So again, we've developed methodologies for doing more temporally resolute forecasting. So that's where we can decompose the electricity signal into 3 components. We can look at day-to-day variation. We can look at seasonal trend of the type that we saw on the previous slide. And we can also look at stochastic element. And we can effectively create a model for each of these components and then combine those 3 models to end up with a synthetic climate module that's pretty good at giving us half-hourly or better resolution of prediction of cooling of demand, and from that we can extract cooling demand. What's interesting about that then is that so in terms of prediction, what we have to understand is that there's a necessity. We have to predict to have foresight of bottlenecks. As I mentioned in the incoming to this slide, we're doing it mainly so that we understand the baseline consumption patterns. And we're also able with these to track changes in patterns, so we can look at increasing AC ownership as time progresses, for instance. In terms of scale, I think it's important that we try and make these predictions as discrete as possible at feeder level or better, so that we understand localized impact, and we understand we can tailor demand response to the specific locality. But a key point is who owns the prediction. So the baseline prediction is effectively setting up a quantification of how well your demand response program has happened. So there's need for ownership to be understood, and trust, transparency, and standardization, very much of what was talked about in the previous presentation. Now, in terms of measurement, the issues are not dissimilar. There's a requirement for clarity and standardization about how measurements are being made. There's an issue about whether we need to wait for smart meters to be in place, because obviously we're just creating time barriers then to the widespread adoption of demand response programs of this nature. In the instance of our trial, we use smart plugs, so we were effectively a kind of subset of the smart homes initiative we heard about in the previous presentation. And the smart plug was able to receive controls from the control platform we developed that was creating the demand response signal. And we would also be able to pick up measurements both of the AC system itself and the temperature and humidity within the dwelling. So the smart plug, the smart plugs we used from Kiot work really well in that regard. And that may well be a kind of staging post on the road to a more standardized view of demand response ready AC systems, for instance. The other thing to note around flexibility and the constraints, if you like, to cooling flexibility is that the response of Indian buildings to AC off events can be very, very rapid. This is a combination of the extremity of the climate and also the state of the building stock. So many buildings in India are no longer designed with vernacular architecture in mind, with deep shading and thermal mass elements. They're designed very much like buildings that we would perhaps build in Western economies, and they respond very rapidly when AC systems are switched off. So if your desire is to produce demand response initiatives that minimize impact on thermal comfort, then you have to operate in very, very short time windows. And your effect then becomes an aggregate response. Well, the effect would always be an aggregate response, but you're talking about trying to control in matters of minutes rather than matters of half hours or hours. The other element around demand response is about how you socialize the benefits. So in any time window when if you're looking for an aggregate signal, you've got a bunch of people participating in your demand response initiative. In any time window that you're extracting a demand response from your system, then you will have some free riders. So you will have a number of people who do not participate, and it's important that you try and encourage or work out a way of ensuring that you deal with this equitably. One of the ways we did it is that we put dwellings into chill classes, and the chill class that you were put into determined how the extent to which your cooling system was constrained for the next period of demand response. And part of the decision of chill class that you were being put into was associated with your previous behavior in terms of your contribution to demand response events. So you can make it about what you've done, your behavior previously, as part of the cohort that's providing the demand response. Quick notes on behavior. There was a nice talk from Philip, really looking at behavior. We did survey the Outable community to talk to them about the ideas of demand response. The interesting thing about the Outable community is it's built on ecological principles. So things like environmental attitudes are normalized within that community. What we found, though, that as stress events started to occur with respect to achievement of thermal comfort within their dwellings, then some of these collectivist environmental values started to defray or become unstable when these situational factors started to occur. So my building gets too hot, or if there was health advice about avoiding stress. And these started to override, if you like, those kind of environmental parameters. And I think there's similar studies being done in UK tariffing studies, where similarly the desire of people to try and act in their economic benefit is overridden when these kind of stress events start to occur. So there are limitations to the extent to which you can take behavior, particularly when relatively, well, very extreme events can be occurring associated with stress, heat stress, and what have you. Just in terms of technology, so again, just a technology focus. So we, as I said, we were part of a big team doing this project, and EDS, a consultancy in Delhi, did a lot of work with us to look at a kind of looking at the cost portfolio of different curtailment options that were available across a range of different technologies. I think demand response comes out very favorably in that regard. It's got low OPEX requirements compared to some of the other technologies. But however, I don't think that really what we're looking at here is a situation where we're going to back one horse. I think every single horse that's got the potential to run in this race is going to get a chance to run. We're going to have to get to a situation where we have a basket of solutions solving the problem of increasing cooling demand stimulated by affluence growth and extreme climate. And that's going to happen, you know, substantially within the next decade. Just leading on then to the pace of change. So the pace of change in terms of cooling demand growing, whether it can be met by a regulated position. One of the things that's quite interesting is there are a number of countries that go down a regulation route to mandate demand responsive ready AC systems. Australia and America are kind of probably leading the way in that regard. The Australian 4755 standard, well, that started discussions in 2004. They're still not happy with the way in which that's being rolled out and the way in which things like baselining methodology is being applied to that. So almost two decades later, that system, that method of regulation in terms of AC system is still not in place. So I think that we need to think, therefore, about how we can stimulate innovation, perhaps in the smart home arena, as was discussed earlier, to try and fast track some of these processes that are going to have to be in place to allow demand response programs to be in place to manage the cooling demand. So just some final thoughts. What I just said about regulation doesn't negate it. I think it still should be supported, but we should recognize it as the tortoise rather than the hare. And indeed, in the meantime, something has to be done. We have to get to a point where as I say, we can fast track that trusted approach of ensuring measurement, prediction, and control that these kind of measurements can be put in place. And I think it's clear that there's a role for policymakers, grid operators, and program designers to embed flexibility as a core requirement, if you like, of their future system planning and each of their years forward analysis to try and unlock the value of these demand side initiatives. And I think on the consumer side of life, it's imperative that we think of innovative methods by which we can engage with the consumer. The role of technology does not take away the consumer as a kind of key agent in terms of making this happen. It maybe shifts the balance a little bit from technology acceptance to true changes in habitual behavior, but nevertheless, they still are core to a situation where demand response initiatives of the kind we've just trialed become accepted and proliferate throughout the residential sector. So that's the end of my quick run through the field trial we've done. Thanks very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Andrew. That was great. Well, thanks to all our speakers, Phil, Vishal, and Andrew. Thank you very much for the great presentations. And thanks to our audience for being so engaged and posting questions in the Q&A box. I see that Phil and Vishal have been able to get to some of those questions, but I'll just pick some which might be of interest to a larger audience, and maybe our speakers can elaborate on that a little bit more. So maybe I'll just go start with Phil. Phil, there were a lot of questions trying to understand the study a bit more. So there were questions around trying to understand the sample, what kind of consumer were these, what incentives did people have to alter their consumption patterns. And then there was one question that talked about whether you saw a difference in changes in demand for households with solar and without solar. And any other questions from the audience that you think you might want to talk about?
Yeah, thank you. Yes, indeed. I was typing away, trying to listen to the other talks as well, but there were a lot of really interesting questions. So yes, the incentive question is a really interesting one. You know, what motivates people to A, take part, and B, then engage. And what I should stress is the sample we're working with is what's called a convenience sample. So we haven't paid people to take part, and we haven't promised them any major benefits beyond information. So essentially what that tends to mean is that you deal with slightly more engaged and motivated people. So it's not nationally representative. We're actually currently going through the process of recruiting a more representative sample. But it's quite difficult because the way we've done it in the past was people received a electricity recorder that they attach themselves under their meter, because smart meters are only just being rolled out and not everybody has got one yet. And a lot of people who rent their homes don't actually have access to their meter in the same way. So there's a bias against people in rented accommodation. The other thing we found, and that's sort of an indication of the bias in our sample, is we've got 10 times as many electric vehicle owners as the general population. So again, that sort of tells you something about the type of demographic, but we're very grateful for everyone with an electric vehicle, because there was a question about that as well. You know, how does the charging pattern of EVs develop? And what we had found specifically for EVs was that within our sample, a lot of people charge at night. And that's slightly at odds with other studies who found that people do exactly what we don't want them to do, which is charge first thing when they come home. And my hypothesis is that it could be because some of our participants are quite engaged in this whole demand shifting space, i.e. that's why they took part, that they're already sort of clued it in to charge their vehicles at night. PV was the other question. PV is fascinating, and in a sense, PV gives you a time of use tariff in a way, because during the daytime when the sun is shining, you have cheap electricity, so it should motivate you to use more at those times. And within the activity data, we seem to see modest evidence for that. It's not very strong. I wish we could link that more directly with the electricity use. The problem is with the way it's metered in the UK, the recording we're getting is net. So when people generate electricity, it looks to us as if their demand is reduced. So unfortunately, that skews the results in a really unhelpful way. And I've been working with colleagues to see what we can do to improve that, because even with smart meters, we don't get separate PV and electricity use, which, yeah, as the question rightly implies, would be really interesting to see how PV changes load and activity patterns. The other question, sorry, I'm going on a bit, but there was a lot of interesting questions about the incentives to shift load. So the principal incentive tends to be price, so variable tariffs or specific monetary incentives. Those have been found to give you responses in the sort of 6 to 15%, depending on how they are presented. What we've done here was deliberately non-monetary. So we've just recruited streetwise for this particular study, where we had several people on each street, and we just told them we're going to aggregate across your street, and the street that collectively responds best to our requests will receive prizes. We didn't even say what the prizes were. In the end, it was, a bit of chocolate and a certificate from the University of Oxford. But that seemed to be enough at a sort of neighborhood collective level to motivate people to really get involved. So neighborhood is actually quite a powerful scale at which to operate.
Thanks, Phil. Vishal, there were some audience questions. I think if I broadly characterize them, about trying to understand what type of residential loads in India should be targeted. Of course, we talked about cooling load being one of the major drivers, but also water heating, water pumping is what people want to understand. So broadly, where do you think is the potential and opportunities for specific loads in India? And if you may also talk about any pilot experience from implementation of such programs in India.
Okay, so there are several questions with regard to what contributes to the peak load and what can be shifted. How do we know? So yes, you can say this is kind of a hypothesis that the peak in the evening and later in the night is because of use of air conditioners, and in case of winters, the high load in the morning might be because of the geysers. So one thing, like what we are doing, we are not taking any of these hypotheses, taking any of these things directly. We are going to learn from this experiment that when is the peak happening in a home, right? What is the usage pattern? When is the peak happening? What is the flexibility? What users are willing to change, right? Just like what Phil mentioned. So we'll try to understand that and provide a system which allows people to do that. Now, what devices contribute to the peak today and when is peak happening today might not be same in the future. In the future, we are expecting a lot of electric vehicles. So with the electric vehicles, the demand might shift all of a sudden as we expect people to come home and start charging, right? So that might be the biggest contributor to the peak at that time. Also, right now, we don't have that much renewables. And when we have a lot of renewables and especially solar, we might not have peak in the daytime because there would be excess of renewable available, and maybe the peak shifts to evening times or night times when renewable is not available. So we don't know. So the question is not to really understand only what contributes to the peak, but empower the homeowner first to understand what is contributing to the peak. And if there is a variable tariff, what devices needs to be shifted, and how do we shift them, and what is the benefit if we shift, the monetary benefit. So if the system can tell that if you switch on the geyser when it is low tariff and store the hot water and use it in the high tariff for taking bath, and this is the savings you will get, and this is the extra cost for buying such a storage heater, that might be one way, right? Or allowing the user to charge the car at a low tariff time. And then we also have to look not only at the home level, we have to look at the aggregate level. So like say, for example, at a locality, there are 1,000 homes. Now all 1,000 homes start charging their car at 11 o'clock in the night, then the peak would probably happen at 11 o'clock for that location. So how do we stagger the charging and make sure that it's more like a level load and not like spikes? So all these things can be done if we have a smart home energy management system which can communicate, and decisions are taken at the home level, at the locality level, at the city level, and optimization can be done at various stages. So this is not, there's a question comparing this with a smart meter. Smart meter, I would say, is a part of SHAMS. So smart meter can communicate a very coarse level data, generally 15 minutes data, and it doesn't tell what devices are on. It just tells the load at every 15 minutes or energy consumed in 15 minutes, right? But SHAMS can actually monitor devices at every second level, can do non-intrusive load monitoring. So we can put one meter, which will automatically detect when the AC is on, when the geyser is on, when the TV is on, and tell us that which device is on at what time and how much energy has been consumed. We don't even need smart sockets to be put on these devices to monitor them. So it can offer a lot of value and a total different kind of benefits that the homeowner can get. Like say, for example, a simple thing, a normative comparison. So I know in my neighborhood with a similar income group, with a similar home and family size, what is the consumption? What is my consumption? Why my consumption is different? Is my AC running hours more? Is my set point too low for cooling? Is my AC defective? Is it consuming too much energy for the same load? So that kind of analytics can be given to the user, and insights can be given how you are performing as compared to others in your neighborhood. And that can also help user to change behavior or to find out the problems and fix it. So that is what I think SHAMS is a technology which will help people manage things better.
Vishal, could you also talk about any pilot experience there is
Right.
with such programs in India?
So there are several pilots at device levels. So like only AC, some of these pilots are at the complete home level. There are a lot of studies available, scientific literature available. I can just say that based on this literature, the estimated savings are about 20 to 25%. But as Phil mentioned, I think Phil mentioned, or Andrew, I'm forgetting, that we just cannot transpose the measures in one country to another country and say, again, you'll get 25% saving. We might not get. There have been instances where such devices have increased energy consumption. Okay, so anything can happen. There's a lot of social, cultural aspect that has to be considered. So we need to do studies in the country, and a lot of studies are required to come out with some reasonable estimation of how much is the impact of SHAMS.
Thank you. Vishal, if I may, in your presentation, you presented sort of results from your survey which you did to shed light on barriers and drivers for smart home automation systems. Could you tell us a little bit about the survey itself, which cities it was in, the demographics and such, and also when I looked at your report, the survey also talks about household preferences for such systems and the type of loads that the households prefer to automate. Could you talk a little bit about that?
So it was a very small survey. I don't remember the exact numbers, but it was more of young and middle-aged people who were participating in that survey. And I would say there is a bias because the survey was conducted online. So people who have access to computers, people who are willing to participate and online surveys and having that kind of education and access. So I would still not take that as a very exhaustive survey and with a very good representation of people in the country. So it is just a start. We have done another survey recently in Reside project with about 450 people participating in that. And we are getting very interesting results. So I would say, let us take these results more from a high educated, higher income group, more IT savvy kind of people. And yes, so we need to do much more to come out with a better understanding of about the real sample that represents the demographics in the country.
Thank you. Andrew, there were some questions around your presentation around trying to understand the sample a little bit better. So how did you select the particular intervention period? What is the total demand reduction in the pilot if the curtailment windows were short? So if you want to pick some of the audience questions to talk about. In addition, can you also tell us a little bit about what your study tells us for communities that are beyond your sample in Oroville? What lessons can be learned and what might not be applicable?
Okay, so just in the mechanics of the trial, if you like. So we ran a number of control periods, if you like. One of the things that we were trying to do was look at different demand response methodologies. So we looked at we tried to look at controlling demand for 1 hour and then relaxing it for the following hour to try and understand if there was rebound effects. We also looked at constructive reduction, so that we were looking at a demand response where we were trying to reduce the peak demand across a longer period, so over the whole 12-hour periods of the day. We didn't get to kind of dynamic signaling where perhaps of the type that the questioner is thinking of, where we were trying to maybe take a grid signal, a voltage signal or something of that nature and target demand in specific windows. But in what we were able to do across the sort of 12-hour period where we were continually applying the demand reduction, is we were able to start to characterize the percentage change in each window, so that we could start rationalizing that against perhaps the severity of the climate and also the number of people who had AC systems operating at that time. That was a predominant, obviously a predominant requirement. The results that we got, so the average across the 12-hour period we were running, we got a 20% reduction in about a just over a 20% reduction in power demand. And we were measuring internal temperatures. So the average increase in dwelling internal temperature to get, so the quid pro quo, if you like, so that what the residents had to give up to give us that demand reduction was about 1.5 degrees. So 1.5 degrees warmer gave us a 20% reduction in power. In terms of learnings, I suppose in terms of learnings outside of this community, I think, as I say, when we did the survey of the community, we were expecting to see perhaps more, well, kind of a stronger hold on their environmental beliefs with respect to consumption behaviour. We provided people with a chance to override the signals that we were sending. I think that what we saw is that heat stress kind of, to a certain extent, trumps that kind of environmental preference, as I mentioned in the talk. So I think I'm fairly confident that the learnings we're seeing here from the outer world community are applicable to a wider cohort outside of an ecological community, if you like. Yeah, I think that I would say that's true.
Thanks, Andrew. I'm just looking, I think we pretty much covered most of the audience questions. Phil, you talked about laundry load in your study being one of the key contributors to the energy savings that you saw. And washing machines is an appliance with growing penetration in India too. So is there something we can learn in terms of targeting washing machines as an appliance for demand response in India? And Vishal, maybe this question is to you, and Phil, you could add. Is this something that is recognized in India and people are paying attention to it?
Yeah, so washing machines really are interesting because we sometimes portray them as a very simple automatable machine where you have a smart washing machine that gets remotely controlled when it does its washing cycle. And of course, that naturally clashes with when we personally need to interact with the machine. There's a particular time when you have to load it and a particular time you want to unload it. An interesting thing that we found in the UK was that people were not so keen on having their washing machine scheduled such that it would finish in the night, because people don't like wet things sitting in the machine for several hours. So that's a real constraint there. So understanding the daily pattern of when you can run the machine is really helpful. And this is where the lockdown in the UK was interesting, because it certainly showed us that working from home gives you new forms of flexibility that weren't there before. So that could be interesting. Washing machines are interesting in other ways as well, because as you say, it's a cultural shift, So, I mean, just as an interesting anecdote, in the UK, there used to be a wash day, one day of the week when people did their washing, and even when washing machines arrived, that sort of persisted. So there's a very strong cultural element to how and when we use washing machines and how and when we hang out washings. In Germany, you don't hang out washing on a Sunday. It's just not done. So these sort of things come into that. The other thing I'd like to stress is when we make this assumption that an appliance can be smart and automated, we touched on privacy and data access and trust. There's some reticence among large parts of the population to give over control over their appliances to agencies that they don't know or trust. So extremely the case with fridges, where in theory you could automate fridges and then shift them in their cycle a little bit in very clever ways to benefit the grid, but people don't like having their fridge meddled with. And so washing machines are possibly a bit easier. Electric vehicles, air conditioning units, heat pumps, all those give us new opportunities to do smart things through automation and control. But that only works if we find a good solution that people trust those agents who do that with their data.
Vishal, what is your experience in India? Is this something that is being paid attention to, given that it's a fast penetrating appliance in Indian households?
So we yet have to do the actual sham trials, but we did a survey and we asked people what devices you are willing to shift, especially like washing machine and geysers. So it seems people are willing to shift, but the real problem is that it should not get into such a time of the day that they cannot unload the clothes and hang them for drying. And in India, I guess majority of the people would dry them online and in the daytime, so that when the sun is there, they get dried, and nobody wants to put them in the evening probably, right? So we need to understand that. One interesting thing we found that, so these are all preliminary results. So we asked them, what will motivate you to change your behavior? A penalty, incentive, or a free electricity? Okay. And interestingly, the incentive and the penalty that we offered was more than the free electricity that the device will consume. So like we said, that there will be a penalty of 10 rupees or incentive of 10 rupees to use a washing machine in the night. And the washing machine will actually consume only 4 rupees for that one load cycle. People preferred 4 rupees worth of incentive. They didn't do the maths probably. So the psychology that I'm getting run this machine for free if I do it in the night is so exciting that it's better than getting 10 rupees, because 10 rupees looks small, change the behavior, right? So it seems that, so one question that we asked was, what if we asked you to change the set point from 24 degrees to 26 degrees, and for that duration, the AC cost is 0. So that is definitely very interesting. So we are finding that we have to understand what is a motivator, what will motivate people to shift their loads, what are the shiftable loads. All these things are work in progress, and we need a lot of data to really, and people might say something on a survey, but might behave totally different when they have to actually do it. And also when they realize what is the real worth of that the offer, then again their behavior would change. So another interesting thing we found, that there are people who are interested in contributing to the environment. So instead of rupees, there were a lot of people who said that if you plant a tree for my change in behavior, that's what will be a motivation for me to change this. So that is very good feeling that we have, that it is the environmental impact that people are worried and not just the monetary impact. And that might again be a motivation for that. So we are still trying to understand this.
Thanks. Vishal also spoke about, and you just talked about that too, barriers to adoption, and price and data privacy sort of come out to be the two key obstacles. How does, maybe Andrew and Phil can talk about from their UK experience, how is UK or other countries addressing this issue, particularly the data privacy?
You want to go first, Phil?
Yes, just to warn you, the nice lawn that you see in my background picture here is currently being mown behind me, so I hope that doesn't cause too much noise. Yeah, data privacy. So the UK is rolling out smart meters on a large scale, and as researchers, we're desperate to get hold of that data because you could learn so much from it. And unfortunately, it's regulated in such a way that that's almost impossible. So just as a sort of personal challenge, I try to get hold of my own smart meter data. And even though I allegedly own this data, it's impossible for me to get hold of it. Now, there's very good motivations behind this. That, you know, this is private and sensitive data, but we seem to have gone slightly overboard the other way in terms of regulation, that it's so hard to get hold of even your own smart meter data. And what I would like to see is, you know, if that became easier, not because people want to see their raw data. As I said, raw data is only interest to nerds like ourselves. But if you can make it easier as a service provider to help people with their data to understand their energy use and synthesize that into messages and provide them a service to, you know, reschedule appliances or, you know, give them useful information, that would be really powerful. So in a sense, all the data is there, but we haven't yet squared that circle of privacy and access to, you know, make it work for people.
Yeah, just an adjunct to that, I guess, a story from previous trials we've done. So we did a trial of a demand response initiative where we were forecasting the low carbon electricity day ahead, and we were making that electricity cheap to try and encourage the utilization of low carbon electricity in a community. And we co-created the little device that we designed. We designed that with that community so that they had an input into how the messaging, very much in the way that Phil was talking about, how the messaging was received to them, so that it was received in a way that they liked. We then, at the end of the trial, asked them to write a love letter to the thing that they'd designed, having run the trial for about 12 months. And it was very interesting. Some of the messages that we got back were glowing in praise. Some people had really fallen in love with us, and indeed were getting up in the middle of the night and putting washing machines on because they knew that they could get low carbon electricity. Other people found that there was something militant about it. So I remember one comment back from somebody saying, there's a militancy in you entering my home and telling me information where you're expecting me, therefore, to have a behavioral change in the way I go about my habits. How dare you enter my home and do this? So it was really interesting in the same, it was an ecological community as well. It was interesting to see this kind of disparate response to something that we as researchers felt was a relatively benign set of statements that they had where they had co-created the message. So I don't know, that maybe tells us something that there's quite a lot of difficulty, I think, in behavioral programs in achieving a deep reach, if you like, because there's so much variability in how people are going to respond to certain programs. The other thing I was going to ask both Phil and perhaps Vishal as well is, one of the things we found was in longitudinal exhaustion in both on those trials. So that we saw a lot of impact in the first 3 months. People very, very engaged, very interested, and then a very quick drop off after that period. And we were sending them obviously they were getting messages every day. It was a research project, so we had field officers in place who were able to, who were part of the community, who were able to chat doors. But we never managed to re-engage with the community like they did in that first 3 months. I just wonder whether you had any comments on anything you were seeing longitudinally about the work you're doing.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. I'm just conscious of time. If our speakers and our audience don't mind, then we can go a little bit 5 minutes over. We can continue the discussion for another 5 minutes, and then my colleague Radhika Khosla will close the session for us. So just, continuing that discussion about data privacy and barriers to adoption. Vishal, you have worked closely with households trying to understand the barriers. You also work very closely with policymakers on this topic. What do you think is the biggest obstacle to demand response in India? And tagging that with a broader question on what role can utilities play in demand response? So there'll be a key player, but in Vishal and Andrew, your experience talking to utilities here, do they see demand response as an opportunity in the residential sector? Vishal, you could start and then Andrew.
So we had some interactions with DISCOM, and they do think that there is opportunity in the residential sector. More specifically, what I think is that because the cost of electricity in residential sector is cheaper than the commercial. So if there is some reduction coming from the residential, it is good for the utility because then they can sell it to the commercial sector at a higher tariff, right? But the whole problem is the chicken and egg problem. So we cannot run a program till the homes are ready to implement it. So right now we don't know what is the current consumption. There is no data available to a homeowner except a bill which comes once in a month or two. So we need to provide them with some way of knowing what's happening and adjust the things. And they don't want to do it because it costs and there is no immediate benefit because there is no time of day tariff or anything like that. So what my feeling is that, at least what I have observed, that people are willing to spend a lot of money for entertainment. So I can buy a TV worth 1 lakh rupees for entertainment, and I won't ask what is the return on investment on that, right? So smart speaker, 10,000, 20,000 rupees, it's okay, right? But when it comes to energy saving, then I don't want to spend even 1,000 rupees till somebody guarantees me a payback. So my feeling is that people are willing to spend on entertainment and security without any payback. Can we piggyback on this setup? So we can have motion sensors, we can have devices to act as hubs. We have apps where we are already spending money to connect to these devices. Can we piggyback on this infrastructure, which is basically self-paid from entertainment and security point of view, and then add on some energy efficiency? So that then the cost of smart home reduces because the multiple benefits are being generated, and the entry point is not energy, but the entry point is entertainment and security. So maybe we have to look at this problem a little differently and give a value add, that why have a smart TV, but just put another meter and I can save more energy for you or save some money for you. That might be interesting for people. So if all this on its own is beneficial to the user, that is, the user gets return on investment because of comfort, because of energy savings, not demand response, energy savings, comfort, security, and entertainment, then demand response would be icing on the cake later on. And we can wait for both the parties, the utility and the homes to be ready for these things to be.
Yeah, just an add to that, I guess. So I guess to some extent, it's the extent of which the electricity industry and the management of it is challenged by the rapid growth in cooling. So I mean, the projections are quite stark. And I think it's undoubted that we're going to see some feeders under extreme stress, and we're going to see outages, and we're going to see a reduced quality of supply as a consequence of that. So I guess on the upside of a demand response program is the capacity for it to effectively secure some level of thermal comfort. Now, obviously, that might not be all that the occupants want and desire in terms of every degree that they desire in their home. But it may be the knowledge that they're participating in a kind of community neighborhood scheme that allows the electricity to keep coming, and some level of thermal comfort therefore to be provided, is an interesting point to make in regards to this. I mean, I agree with Vishal. We seem to emasculate ourselves in the energy industry with a belief that everybody is in their homes acting as discrete energy system managers, constantly making decisions as to whether they're going to purchase something as a consequence of whether it will pay back in 18 months or not. I don't think it's the correct way to go. I think we should be trying to understand the beauty, if you like, of the low carbon transition and how we can sell the low carbon transition to people, and these routines as being core elements of that low carbon transition. There's no real other game in town, is there?
I agree with that. I mean, for years we've been trying to promote the concept of energy services rather than just seeing energy as a commodity, and this sort of appeal to rational decisions. Of course, we make, as Vishal said very rightly, we make most of our purchasing decisions rather emotionally, and in energy we don't want an air conditioning unit, we just want to be comfortable. And if that can be provided, there might be different ways to do that. One of which, of course, which we're sort of battling with in the UK as well, is before you install a different heating or cooling system, it's often worth looking at the building fabric and refurbishing that. And if we look at that purely as a sort of return on investment decision rather than as a comfortable home, then we might be missing part of the motivation that could help us along. There was 2 points that I wanted to pick up from Andrew's points from earlier. One was the danger of this sort of big brother notion. If we give feedback, that looks like we're actually spying on people. And we've been grappling with that because by looking at low profiles, we could tell people some very specific things like, you're currently using more than we would expect for appliance X or Y, and people might think, oh dear, you're looking over my shoulder rather too intrusively here. So it's a very fine balance we need to strike there, how we feed information back. And I'm also very mindful that many people might not appreciate how much we can read from load profiles. There is sort of personal information in that. And the other thing that Andrew mentioned was the longitudinal fatigue, which I think is a really interesting point, because nudging people once or twice to do something, there is sort of a degree of fatigue, at which point you won't respond as much anymore. And I think there's a very interesting distinction between nudging people for a one-off or two-off response, or actually changing behavior patterns in a sustained way. And of course, this is where our investment decisions are really key. If we make a purchase for a different appliance, that can lock in a whole new mode of energy use.
Yeah, I mean, COVID, I think, is very interesting in that regard as well. I think we've seen COVID's kind of foisted upon us a requirement for changes in practices and habits. And I think it'll be really interesting to see, after 18 months of this, how much of that is retained as genuine long-term habitual behavior practices, as opposed to something transitory, and we all go back to 2018 at some point, and off we go. It'd be interesting to see how the data comes out in the next year or two.
Well, thank you very much. This was great. I'll now ask my colleague Radhika to close the session.
Sana, thanks everybody. In the interest of time, I won't take more than a minute. But just to say that, the reason we started these roundtables now 4 years ago was to spotlight this issue of residential electricity use and how consumption is rising. And, we know that it's anywhere between sort of 5 to 6 times an increase of growth between 2015 and 2030. And that's a huge amount. This is in the Indian context, but it's a huge amount in terms of magnitude, but it's also a huge amount in terms of uncertainty about where we will actually end up. And in many ways, our quest is to be able to understand what the themes are, whether it's cooling, whether it's rural demand, whether it's urban demand, whether it's demand response, that can help shift that trajectory of growth. So, I think there's so much more here. And this time we focused on rural electricity and on DSM. But looking forward to seeing all of you next year for new themes. I want to thank our speakers, both for this session and for our session last week. And that's it. I will close now and thank all of you on behalf of the Prayas Energy Group, the Center for Policy Research, and the Oxford India Center for Sustainable Development at the University of Oxford. So thank you very much, and bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.